Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. You're listening to Metaphysical Media with Stephen Lewis and Stephen Frampton. How are you, Stephen?
I'm doing great, thank you, Stephen. I just wish the world was doing as well.
So do I. And you know what? Maybe one day it will, thanks to all of our efforts, the global community. We here at Metaphysical Media, we intend to use both the microscope and the telescope of astrology, tarot, and metaphysics in general in order to understand the current events, in order to understand the strategy and the secrets of our leaders. We've really got so much to talk about. There's so much that is really humongous going on in the world today in various regions of strategic importance to the United States, which is where we are located out of. And even though we try to escape having any subjective bias, we are still, let's face it, in the West. And, we are curious as to the West's goal in this big strategic game, which is undoubtedly how they probably the worst of them look at it. What do you think, Steve, about what's happening, for example, in Europe with Russia signing Russia recently participating in the BRIC summit with China and India and South Africa and Brazil playing a part, etc. What do you think that the implications are for Europe based upon that?
Well, I found it very interesting to hear that news, and I immediately felt that the photograph of the BRICS leaders all huddled there together like they'd just won a competition or something.
Yeah.
But I basically looked at that and thought, well, really, the headline here should be America, we flip the bird at you.
I know. I was just about to say that's the only thing missing from the picture is, everybody giving the bird. That's the only picture I've ever seen Vladimir Putin smiling in, and I swear he looks like a grizzly bear sucking on a lemon slice. Yeah, I thought it was a smile because, the physiognomy of his face was configured in the way traditional humans would react when they smile, but it just didn't. I didn't really get it wasn't screaming mirth. You know what I mean? I wasn't really getting mirth from that smile. It was just like a big screw you to the West. And indeed, that's precisely what it is. I do believe that it would be in the West's best interest and also Europe's best interest for Russia to democratize further, to westernize further, to become more involved with the European Union in a sincere and emphasis on democratic way.
But they're not.
They are not. And their activity with BRIC is a step in the precisely wrong direction. Some of the other signatories to that coalition are China, which is very surprising. One would not expect to see China allied with Russia.
Well, I don't know. I think that we did talk about that, Stephen.
We did.
I think we said that intuitively we wouldn't be surprised if there was some collaboration between Russia and China. I think that one thing they have in common, obviously, is that they don't like the dominance of the U.S. And I think that your observation about Europe is really astute because since the annexation of Crimea, the European relations with Russia have certainly been soured, and it seems that the relations between Russia and the United States are at an all-time low since the Cold War. I have to say that I'm sure these nations and their leaders are tired of our economic dominance and the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency with all that this entails. I'm sure that they want to try and strategize to get greater control over economic matters. So it really is a flip the bird to the U.S. and to Western Europe, probably. But I think that the situation in Europe is very complex as well. The UK has a very close alliance with the US and always has, but I feel that increasingly there's a distrust of the UK, partly because of their close alliance with the US. If you read RT, I know that you look at the news from many different sources, but when we're looking at RT, you do get a different perspective on things, and actually you hear things about the UK and the US that you don't hear about in the UK or the US. So it's quite interesting. I noticed that they make a lot of observations about the death penalty in the US, a lot of observations about the paedophilia scandal in Britain, etc. But yeah, really interesting that that these BRICS nations are clubbing together. And I think that so often we look at the news and we look at each story and we see it as a separate issue, an independent matter. But actually, when you step back and you look at what's going on in the world, you see how you can actually connect the dots between all of the things that are occurring. And it seems like there's a great struggle for power in the world at the moment, more than there has been for quite a long time. Do you agree with that?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think what we're seeing here is a power grab, more specifically, where the global power is going to be redispersed due to America's lack of preeminence. Now, it's not a complete absence of preeminence. I don't want to give anyone the impression that, it's popular, it's trendy, in fact, in the media outlets, both here and abroad, to characterize America as a defunct empire. This is balderdash. I want to emphasize that America still is a global power. Russia is not a global power. Neither is China. This is lost in the buzz about China's gargantuan economic reforms and its growth. But what people fail to realize is that China is more of a regional power than it is a global one. Even though that's liable to change. Still, as far as the military is concerned, Russia, certainly no competition. Neither is China. America is still the dominant military force, peerless among nations in the fact that America can project its military will in any area of the globe, and in fact has boots on the ground in various countries, thousands of bases. So what we have here is a sense of this global and sole superpower, America, that's waning. And the big question, the important question is, how will that power be dispersed? That's the strategy for America. America knows that, and it doesn't want to be the sole global superpower, because there are some domestic reforms America is very interested in engaging in here. But the question is, how will our power be dispersed? And we want to obviously to control that, to shunt that dispersal in the right direction. Ideally, it would be towards a Russia and a China that are democratizing. And this is going to be an unavoidable step. And this is the problem with BRIC, because China is not going to be able to help but to democratize. Along with its explosive economic growth is a growing political awareness among her citizens. And the disparity, the widening gap between the wealthy and the poor in China is going to veritably demand social reform and democratization. And plus, America still holds the bargaining chip of Taiwan. Once China integrates Hong Kong economically fully, then Taiwan's going to become more important to China, Steve. And so this is what could be surprising policy or think tanks or whatever. The Russia-China pairing is really kind of weird, because China is going to be very much the boss here, and Russia is going to be shoehorned into a junior partner status with China. And it's surprising to see Russia accept that. This, to me, sort of signals that Russia is going to incline toward these irresponsible delusions towards their anterior empire, the past ideas of grandeur of Mother Russia, and this could take the form of a few disturbing variants, a sort of Slavic kingdom or a broader Eurasian kingdom. Either way, I think it bodes poorly for that dispersal of global influence that's going to happen as America wanes, Steve.
I see where you're coming from, absolutely, and I think that it would be very interesting for us to compare the natal charts for Russia and China at some stage, perhaps today, perhaps in a future show, just to look at the nature of that relationship or the potential there. I was quite shocked, actually, to read that Russia has, or Putin visited Cuba recently when he was over in Latin America, and they agreed to reopen the Russian spy base or listening post in Cuba, and that's just 150 miles or so off the coast of Florida. So it seems that Putin is either being very deliberately antagonistic, or it seems that he is putting together dots that perhaps others aren't putting together. He's really pushing hard against the U.S. and the West, the allies of the U.S. or previously considered allies of the U.S. like Germany, but there are so many problems between Germany and the U.S. with spying at the moment that relationship doesn't seem as strong as it was, certainly before those revelations. But I wonder, as I look at everything that's going on, I wonder, well, is Putin just being antagonistic, or is he aware of an agenda that perhaps we're not so aware of, and is he pushing back on that? It's quite interesting to listen to some of his talks or speeches in Russian with translations and really consider what he's saying. But I pulled the two charts, Stephen, for Russia and the USA, and straight away I can see that it's quite an unfortunate dynamic. If these were two people having a consultation about whether their relationship could be a long-term relationship, the answer would be no, quite simply. And I'm pretty cautious with that with individuals, because if people are prepared to do a lot of work on themselves, then they can make a relationship work, even if there isn't a strong natural compatibility. But in this case, I think the answer would have to be no. It's too tense. So when you compare the charts, Russia and the US, there are a lot of oppositions in this chart, or in the bi-wheel, which combines the two charts. So just for everybody's reference, when you see an opposition astrologically, two planets that oppose each other, what you have really is two factors that are pulling in different directions. So you get this tense dynamic, one going in one direction, the other going in the other direction. So we see oppositions in our natal charts, and they are parts of ourselves that are not well reconciled and need to be harmonized, brought together. But obviously, when we see negative or challenging aspects in an astrological relationship of two parties, then this is not good. And basically, in these two charts, there are 15 oppositions, and in a normal analysis, you'd expect to see 7 or 8. So that alone says that the natural dynamic between Russia and the United States is just, they're poles apart, literally poles apart. And then you observe that the United States sun, its essence, its power center, its status at 13 degrees Cancer is conjunct the south node of the moon in the Russian chart. So it's just a very unfortunate mix, isn't it, basically?
Yes, it is. You mentioned the excessive number of oppositions in the aspects between these two charts, and that is definitely a big strike against fruitful diplomacy between our two nations, because the opposition is analogous to the whole topic of the seventh house, in the sense that it references relationships. It is the very topic of diplomacy. It's awareness, the polarity. You see, the awareness of the other, and hence wrapped up into the opposition is the whole idea of strife and conflict. And with this sort of aspect, one would expect concrete events that change things, that define crises between these two nations. And now we're talking about the Russia that emerged in 1991. We're not talking about the Soviet Union, even though, without a doubt, the modern Russian chart would have emerged from the ashes of the Soviet chart, just as the Soviet chart emerged from the ashes of the earlier, anterior Russian chart that dates back into antiquity. But I digress there. So let's talk about one of the more interesting and one of the more prominent oppositions in this chart. We have the Russian Uranus in opposition to the American Sun. Now, this we said the opposition represents strife and conflict, actual events. Now, Uranus, this is Russia's Uranus. This is a symbol for Russia's uniqueness. Do you see? It's an impulse for rebellion, being different. It's sort of like a contrarian impulse. You say potato, I say potato. So this Russia's Uranus in opposition to the Sun represents a de facto position, where if America says that fire trucks are red, Russia is going to say that no, actually most of them are green these days.
I think that's a great way of looking at it, because really it is a question of just a completely different philosophy, completely different way of viewing life and the world. And again, if you take the example of two individuals with these charts, you probably say, look, you're such different people that you're going to find you're not going to have enough in common in this relationship. It's just going to be too challenging.
Right.
But I was noting that Uranus is it Uranus in opposition to Mars in the U.S. chart? Let me see. No, the Russian Uranus, the Russian Mars is in Sagittarius, isn't it? 6 degrees Sagittarius.
It is, and it's receiving a square from Jupiter in the Russian chart, which we talked in an earlier episode. We did a show based on Russia, and we talked at length about the ramifications of that Jupiter and Virgo in Russia's second house. Mars is also engaged in a pretty tight sesquiquadrate with its midheaven, and the sesquiquadrate isn't so dynamic and noticeable as the square or the opposition would be, but it's still important, especially when it's as exact as this one is. Mars sesquiquadrate the midheaven. This is going to represent a sort of an unstable sort of incongruity, a very subtle resistance between the factors indicated. In this case, the Russian military, the Russian urge to expand, and the midheaven, this formal bureaucratic, its government, its king, its ruler, whatever that might be. In this case, probably some obscure Politburo, the party, what have you. But let's talk about some of the other oppositions that are also interesting in this synastry, and that sort of back up the testimony we saw between Russian Uranus opposed to the American Sun. There's also the Russian Mercury in opposition to the American Venus. This is also a fairly tight and applying sort of opposition. And this is whereas with Uranus in opposition to the Sun, we have a natural rebellion and defiance that is an obvious impediment to any sensible diplomacy. However, with the Mercury-Venus opposition, what we have here is an essential flaw in communication itself. Imagine two relatives who can't tell each other that they love them, the father and the son, for example. That's a bad analogy because we're not related in that way to Russia. However, we've all seen it. two people who should get along, but they can't tell each other that they love them. But this goes even deeper. It represents an inability to communicate any sort of aesthetic ideals to one another. And so in that sense, it can easily be seen to represent a contempt for one another's artistic systems, perhaps, or a mutual contempt for each other's aesthetic ideals or each other's attempts and techniques to create beautiful things. And also it represents an opposite two ideologies, two different ways to sort of impose harmony and on logic, on thinking, on mass thinking. These two systems of thinking are in opposition to one another. So we have basically two charts that are set up in mutual antagonism in just about every important way. Unfortunately,
it's true. It's a very challenging dynamic, as we've said. The thing that alarms me particularly is that the Saturn, the major malefic in Russia's chart at 3 degrees Aquarius, is only 4 degrees away from the south node of the moon in the US chart, and because the nodes move clockwise rather than counterclockwise, we're definitely going to have here over a period of time is Russia's Saturn progressing towards the US south node of the moon. So that is almost like a pincer, really, that's closing in over time. I'll progress the charts in a moment, but they'll certainly be closer together than they were, and unless one of these nations changes its chart, they will become conjunct at some point in time.
Yeah, it's going to be really sad to see. Interesting at least to see what happens when that configuration takes place. I mean, if the latest BRIC summit actually was in Brazil, I want to say. Actually, I did a chart for the very first BRIC summit, Steve. I figured that first BRIC summit would be sort of paradigmatic of the entire coalition. It was held in Yekaterinburg, Russia. I just did it for noon. With these things, you can't really hammer down a time. So I just did it for noon. The first BRIC summit was on June the 16th, 2009. For those listening, if they want to, cast a chart, it was in Yekaterinburg, Russia. That's a really difficult one to spell. It's Yekaterinburg. I tripped up.
That's where the Romanovs were held under arrest, isn't it? Yekaterinburg.
Yes, it is. It's a city of quite historic import for Russia. So that's where the first BRIC summit was actually held. And even though we can't really get a house system imposed upon this chart, there are some planetary configurations that are, I think, worth mentioning. In this chart, we have the Russian sun in a square aspect to the BRIC Saturn, which is a configuration repeated in the sign asteroid between Russia and China, where we have the Russian sun in square to China's Saturn. So as far as I'm concerned, these are going to be breaks on the limits of what Russia is hoping to accomplish with the BRIC summit, with the BRIC coalition.
So you don't feel that the Russian investment in that BRICS project is going to be fruitful?
Right, exactly. I think that the financial end of things is going to be the brick wall Russia hits. I think that's going to be the major problem, the snag that brick is actually going to have in its functionality.
Okay. Well, I looked briefly, Stephen, at the progress charts for Russia and the United States just to explore that dynamic of the planet Saturn in Russia's chart progressing towards the south node of the moon, that point of self-undoing in the US chart. And it seems that by just after the mid-2020s, they will be conjunct and Pluto will move into that spot as well. So that's a particularly worrying dynamic. Do you agree?
Yes, I do, because I tell you what my specific concern in this regard is that Ukraine will suffer the brunt of all this posturing between Russia and America. Ukraine is vital to America's interests in the region. Eurasia, the entire continent, the entire landmass spanning from Lisbon all the way over to the Kuril Islands in Japan. The entire region is of strategic importance to America due to its natural resources, its energy resources. Not only that, its access. We've got the European front shored up for the most part, but all of that will change if Russia gains headway in Ukraine. And when I say gaining influence or gaining headway, I'm talking in terms of military influence, but also in terms of the appeal of their government structure, the influence of their government over Ukraine. That's also important. What we want is for Ukraine to be fully embraced in the European Union, and we want to see the complete integration of Ukraine into Europe, so that America's interests there in that what is essentially the western border of Russia and Eurasia, and the very important access route to get at the oil fields in Central Asia, which are vast and relatively untapped.
I think a lot of it's about security. The Russians didn't like our heavy involvement in the military involvement in the Middle East. And I think that was one of the reasons why they objected so strongly to the idea of us going in and doing anything in Syria. So that I think that they've taken a stand in some way to object to the fact that they feel surrounded, and it seems interesting that all of a sudden now Russia announced that it will open up its spying center or its intelligence facility in Cuba right on the U.S. doorstep. It's almost like tit for tat. You want to be on our doorstep, okay, we'll be back on yours.
Right. The Russian people, as shown by Moon in the 14th degree of Capricorn, they're going to be easily roused, I would imagine, toward Capricornian things, which is, status quo, security-oriented types of issues. And you mentioned that, you hit the nail on the head when you said surrounded. One big fear that Russia would have, along with China, is the fear of encirclement. This harkens back to what I said earlier about Russia not really being a global superpower at all. At best, they're a regional player. They can affect outcomes, but they can't impose their will on something. And it's in Russia's best interest, I might add, if they do not overstep certain lines. They don't want to go to war with America, and neither does China. America right now, if it's not, it should be, is formulating a triage, a priority list. This is what we're not going to tolerate, and this is the line that if you cross it, we will mess you up. And China wants to be aware of where that line is, because they don't want to cross it. They have to know where the line is at so they don't cross it. They don't want to cross it. That would be contrary to their best interest. You see, China is, and this is the source, I'm sure, of all of the disharmony in the Russia-China chart and the Russia-BRIC chart. This is, I'm sure, is going to be the hard reality against which Russian idealism will be dashed. Do you see?
Yeah, it's interesting that in the Cuban chart, when you progress the Cuban chart to the current time, the sun has progressed. The Cuban sun has progressed to be conjunct Jupiter in the Russian chart. So that's a classic alignment or configuration reflecting some mutually beneficial deal. The leader of Cuba agreeing to do something favorable for Russia, Jupiter.
Sure.
And that's extremely interesting, just to see that dynamic come together in the charts,
Well,
reflecting that they were likely to do some kind of deal, and Russia obviously wrote off a load of debt that Cuba owed in exchange for this deal.
right, and that's going to be a huge source of Russia's motivation here. Their natal Jupiter in Virgo, I want to point out that Virgo is often associated with Latin America in mundane astrology. And so Jupiter in Virgo is an obvious reference to enriching oneself on the resources of Latin America. This is an economic goal of Russia. However, if you look at a synastry chart of Russia and China, China's Saturn restriction, denial, is partile conjunct. I mean, we're talking it's only minutes away from being exact. In other words, China's Saturn is going to be there to stop Russia from getting the economic benefit it hopes to get due to its association with Latin American countries, of which Brazil and Cuba are the forerunners. And certainly Venezuela is going to want to get involved as well. Let's not forget them. There's a distinct leftist tilt in pan-Caribbean and Latin American politics that America certainly has not ignored, but has mishandled, I would imagine. We've mishandled it. I want to add real quickly, we're mishandling it in our current domestic attitude toward the Mexican immigration question. We want to cultivate better relations with Mexico because we definitely need more democratic impetus in the Latin American region.
I was looking at China and Russia, and my intuitive feel when I glanced at the two charts together was, well, these two would hop into bed together just because it feels good, one night stand.
Yeah.
It looks like that to me. It doesn't look like a long-term trusting collaboration. It just looks like as I said, a fling because it's convenient.
Yeah, they're going to find themselves in a huge power struggle with China. This is going to be terrible because I'll tell you where the seeds of problems are for this. What are they, a quintet by now? At any rate, the problem's going to be in the Venus-Pluto conjunction, where I want to say, where China's Venus at 19 Scorpio is pretty close to Russia's Pluto at 21 Scorpio, and so this is paradigmatic of a power struggle in a relationship. One's going to try to dominate the other, and more than likely, my speculation on this is that the Russian urge toward imperial glory is going to be quite handily and quickly thwarted by the Chinese approach, which is very cautious, slow, deliberate. China realizes that even though it's benefiting from the current media inflatus regarding its economic growth, China understands the truth of the matter. They're just as susceptible to bubbles as we Westerners are. They fully comprehend the possibility that a financial crisis of the matter along the lines of the 2007 American economic crisis could happen there. Also, there's also the distinct possibility China could take a nationalistic turn, and this would also halt economic development if China, for whatever reason, stops democratizing. I don't expect that to happen, not for astrological reasons. I haven't really gotten into that quite yet, but rather just for geopolitical reasons. My guess on that, my common sense guess, is that China is going to lean more and ever. It's going to evolve into increasingly more democratic means of operating, and this is very good for America. So in a way, we can actually expect China to do a lot of our policing and disciplining of Russia for us. Russia is in for a wake-up call.
Well, I'm intrigued by the fact that China's Mars and Pluto are conjunct the Russian ascendant. That's a very powerful but potentially very problematic dynamic in itself. And then when you compare the two charts, you see that actually China's Mercury conjunct Neptune is in both of those planets are in the bends of the Russian chart. So again, if I try to step back and say, well, if one of these were my clients, what would I be saying about their potential relationship? And I have to say that if Russia was my client with China's Mercury conjunct Neptune in the bends of the nodes in Russia's chart, my advice to the client would be, you've really got to be very careful, very, very cautious in this relationship, because it's quite possible that China is not really genuine towards you, and I wouldn't trust what is said or even what is agreed, because China's words and agreements, Mercury, are conjunct Neptune, which can be confusing, and they might suit you in the moment, but at the end of the day, they're both in the bends of your lunar nodes, so this is potentially very problematic. And because China's powerful conjunction of Mars and Pluto, both potentially violent planets, are conjunct your ascendant, you want to be careful, because it's like having a dangerous pet that you think is all fun, but if it turns on you, then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of dynamic I'm seeing here. I do say, though, that the natural fit between China and Russia's psyches, described astrologically, is a far neater, far more natural fit than Russia and the United States, for example, when you look at those two charts. But again, I'm drawn back to the fact that I would be advising Russia to be very, very careful what they do and what they agree with China.
Yeah, BRIC is supposed to be an economic space. There isn't supposed to be any military, at least to my knowledge. I'm far from an expert on BRIC, but obviously there's going to be some military benefit from this. And I'll tell you what, if Russia were my client, if Russia were distilled into the form of a human being and were sitting across my desk from me, I would say, I tell you what, pal, you need to watch out for your wife. Can I speak to you bluntly here? I'm your counselor, after all, your advisor. But I tell you what, with this configuration, with her Mars, on your
you took the words from my mouth. Go for it.
Yeah, with her Mars on your ascendant, pal. What I'm seeing here is, you're going to be her big dumb bodyguard. Okay, you're going to be the focalization point of her competitive instincts. She's going to fight her conflicts through you. She's going to stand up to other people through you. She's going to advance her competitive instincts through you. Either get you to do it materially, by supplying you with weapons. Here's a pistol. Go shoot this coworker who threatened to rape me, or by just telling you to do it, not even supplying you with the weapon, just telling you to go get the weapon yourself and get the job done, or whatever.
Or even watch out, because someday.
I'm sorry, Steve. I think we had a bit of a connection issue here, man. Steve, are you there?
Yes, sorry, I've lost my Skype access
okay.
momentarily. But what I was saying is, even you would advise the client, Russia, to be careful, because the wife, China, might someday just slip something in their drink or stick a knife in their back.
Yeah, and let's be frank here. Mars on the ascendant is a classic configuration for accident, bloodshed and for bad news. But still, I would also say to Russia, I would say, well, your wife has a lot of money. In fact, she's famous throughout the neighborhood for having a lot of money, for her rapid ascent in business. She's got plenty of money to supply you with weaponry to get you to do her dirty work for her. She's got plenty of money for that. She can invest in your military quite amply. And in fact, the bone of contention here, let's not forget, is the sign of Virgo, Latin America, also Africa. But, in Latin America, Brazil, this brings Brazil into the play, now into the fore. Brazil certainly is not a global player, but they're not a global power. However, they are accorded a central status in the big scheme of things because, obviously Brazil has a great deal of influence in South America. Their economy is going great, so they're a natural beneficiary of BRIC. So is South Africa. They're rather surprising. I'm not really sure of the historical relationship between these countries in South Africa. But their connection to Africa is obvious. They're an entry point. Now, see, I want to emphasize for everyone, this is a historic locus of paranoia for China. They fear encirclement as well. They want access to Africa, the Arabian Sea, and the Middle East. And India blocks that. This is the surprising thing because India and China are historically enemies, precisely for this reason. And China and Pakistan are the more natural allies here, and yet Pakistan has been invited to sit out. So what we have is a situation where Russia is being, in my opinion, this is my speculation here, led like a mule, with a carrot on a stick in the direction of Latin American resources, and also being incentivized probably through economic injections into their military-industrial complex. Through China, and so now they're primed to act as muscle, and now we have Pakistan, who's undoubtedly grumpy from being left out of this Kafi Klatch, this grouping. They've got to be ticked off about it, and probably Pakistan is probably too unstable to be a partner in all of this. So they're seizing. Who knows? They might fire off a nuke. They might get a wild hair up their butt and just fire off a nuke at New Delhi, out of pure spite.
It would be interesting at some stage to look at the charts to compare the charts for India and Pakistan, because there hasn't been a lot of focus in recent times in the media, it seems, upon India and Pakistan. Their history is very interesting, and the dynamic is potentially very problematic. So we should look at that sometime. Yeah. Shall we take a look at the situation in the Middle East, Stephen?
Absolutely.
Obviously, there really isn't any good news this week, from what I can see. Looking at Iraq, there seems to be less reporting on Iraq, partly because of the situation between Israel and Palestine. So I find, Stephen, that almost when I look at the news items on the different sources that are available to us, things that would normally be right at the top of the list are quite far down the list, just because there's so much going on. It's quite challenging to find something on Iraq because there's just so much in the media about Israel and Gaza. But again, we've got this exceptionally chaotic situation with Iraq and ISIS, the civil war raging away in Syria. Bashar al-Assad has been re-elected. How that happens, I'm not sure. He's been re-elected for his third term, and then we've got this dreadful tension between Israel and Palestine. And I was looking at the news this afternoon and could see all of the controversy about the 4 boys that were killed on a beach in Palestine. There was some kind of shelling on the beach, and these 4 boys were killed.
Yes, yeah, it's really sad. What an intractable situation that conflict is. I mean, and it's confusing, and to wrap your mind around it all, to try to pick a stance on this thing, and you know, you're right. ISIS did get overshadowed, and yet they were in the news. We had some reports of some British nationals actually who fighting for ISIS, who were recently who died in some fighting over there in Iraq, about 75 kilometers or so outside of Baghdad. And so now I think this is a problem for Britain, because there are apparently a lot of British Muslims who are leaving there to go fight with ISIS. They identify something about ISIS really causes them to identify rather strongly with ISIS, and so there have been I think like a couple of hundred of them by now. But of course, a lot of countries are seeing an efflux of their you know, young idealistic youth into ISIS. So, you know, ISIS is playing the game. They're playing it like a Westerner would play it. Ostensibly, they're religious, but they're going about this in a sophisticated manner in terms of propaganda, in terms of brainwashing through media, and in terms of their carnality. They lack sort of the spiritual asceticism. Forgive me for saying this, of some other terrorist groups. You know what I mean? They don't. They seem to be, to me at least, distinctly less religious, despite their name.
Yes, it also, the leader of Boko Haram in Nigeria released a video message praising ISIS and
right.
You know, saying how he felt that they have a common cause, that they're fighting the same war in effect. And I found that fascinating because just a couple of days beforehand we were talking about the similarities between those two very dreadful groups. But you know, going to Israel, I just really fear for Israel and Palestine at this time, because this military action by the Israelis in response to the rocket fire, and obviously all very much surrounding the tensions with the teenagers that were killed, the 3 Israeli teenage boys, and then the poor Palestinian boy that was burned to death. So we've got all of this flaring up, and I think it's in day 10 now. We must be in about day 10 of the military action, or the Israeli military action. But again, you see in the media requests for the situation to be calmed, for there to be a ceasefire, for there to be negotiations. But I look at the astrological dynamics, Stephen, and just feel, well, gosh, this is just the beginning. You know, it's not as though we're in day 10 or day 11 and this will all be done by day 15. I'm again looking at the charts and seeing that eclipse being triggered in the middle of August, and feel very, very fearful for all of the people involved. Goodness knows what that will trigger in the middle of August. We've talked about it in our previous show, but this is really, really serious, in my opinion.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, that area of the world is another one of the key regions of strategic interest to America. Obviously, we want Israel and its surrounds to be as stable as humanly possible. This is going to be impossible for Israel. It, in fact, never has been possible for Israel. Periods of stability for this country, well, the technical phrase for it is they're rarer than hen's teeth. It just doesn't happen, unfortunately. And, you know, it's sort of kind of like just written right there on the tin. Israel is a bane to all of her neighbors. I mean, she's surrounded by countries and regimes that would like to see her disappear. If you're Israeli, then you live in a world where your neighborhood grocery store might not be there tomorrow because it's been shelled by a Hamas rocket. If you're a Palestinian, uh, then you're living in a world where a 10-minute a journey that should take 10 minutes by car takes 4 hours because of checkpoints and walls, etc. So, really, this is an intractable situation that's going on here, and it's sort of going to be made worse by the fact that the synastries between the American President Barack Obama, and Benjamin Netanyahu are essentially one of antagonism as well. These two charts, the charts of the leaders of these two countries, are such that it's sort of cosmically wired that that President Obama will, in fact, deny, many Israeli desires. Now, whether or not this signals a wider trend towards American disengagement, I'm not sure. In my opinion, I'm thinking it would be a great idea to sort of give Turkey the Ukraine treatment, in the sense of rolling out the red carpet to them. I think the EU needs Turkey, because I really think Turkey can go a long way towards stabilizing the region as a whole, and provide an appealing alternative to ISIS. That's what I think we really need in the Middle East. Of course, this isn't a forum for me to vent my opinion on the matter, because, quite frankly, given the nature of a lot of these charts we're looking at, they are rather inclined toward belligerence with each other. However, I think our only hope is in the diplomatic weight of Turkey, who is sort of getting the short shrift. If we don't cultivate Turkey into the wider democratic sphere, then they will radicalize like Iran. We will essentially have two Irans. We don't want that. Turkey is strategically located because it's very close to Azerbaijan and Georgia, and it's a vital link to the resource-rich Central Asian states of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, places like all the stands. They're what's been referred to as the Eurasian Balkans, and essentially that's what we have going on here: the Balkanization of these areas. All of a lot of these regions, the Central Asian states, Ukraine, Europe, to right on up, bordering up to Iran. A lot of these places used to belong to Russia. They don't anymore. That stopped in 1991, and so there's been a surge of nationalism going on there. For example, in Iran, in Turkey, if we don't get Turkey into the fold, who's to say that the Kurds in Turkey and Iran won't start agitating for a third state? Then, boom, all of a sudden, the instability in the region's increased. And this is going to affect the current war in Gaza. This is going to affect it in a big way. That's the reason why I guess I'm wasting so much oxygen about it, is because we need allies to engage with us in this process. And Israel can't be our ally because it's the old paradox. Tertium non datur. The third thing is not given. In other words, the solution to an opposition isn't existing in the conditions that breed that opposition. There has to be a tertium, a third thing. The third thing has to be given. So that outside influence, in my opinion, ought to be Turkey.
It's interesting that you began with a reference to Obama and Netanyahu and their charts.
Right.
And one of my initial reactions to the comparison between Obama and Netanyahu is that Obama's Mars is conjunct Netanyahu's midheaven, and that's a tense and potentially problematic dynamic in itself. Having one person's Mars conjunct the other person's midheaven, because it's the midheaven that rules the reputation, the career. So that's an issue in itself. But because I pulled those two charts, Stephen, because I pulled Barack Obama's chart and Benjamin Netanyahu's chart, I noted that in Obama's chart, Neptune is at 8 degrees Scorpio, and it's progressed to 9 degrees Scorpio. And that's the very point, or it's not the exact point, I think it's give or take a couple of degrees, but that's the very sensitive point that we were talking about in the Israeli chart, where that south node is located, and where Pluto is located in the Palestinian charts. So it's that very point that experienced or was stimulated by a recent solar eclipse. Now, it means then that in the middle of August as well, Obama will be experiencing the triggering of an eclipse in his chart. And in his chart, it is Neptune. So can you pull the Israel chart, Stephen, and Obama's chart, so that we can have a look at that in the middle of August and say, well, so what does this mean for Obama? I haven't spent a lot of time, in all honesty, analyzing Obama's chart in recent weeks, because there's been so much going on in the Middle East, and we had all of the initial problems with the Ukraine and Russia. So I wasn't really seeing Obama's chart as a priority. But given and you remind us of this regularly, given that the leader of a nation, their chart in effect is very significant to the entire nation because they're leading the show.
Yeah, actually we should feature one of our own future shows, or a portion of it at least, to analyzing President Obama's chart. It's a remarkable chart, and he is a remarkable man. It's certainly, I would love to do it. I hate to call it an expose, but it merits analysis, particularly given his status as a world leader. So we should do a show about the president's chart. You mentioned that his Mars was very exactly conjunct Mr. Netanyahu's midheaven. And, to me, what that screams out is the situation where, I do believe our president sees it as a personal mission to deny Mr. Netanyahu on things. I definitely don't believe that there's any love lost between them.
No, there's not a lot of collaboration. Really, it just seems to be for face value. It just seems to be for face. It's not really a profound connection or collaboration that we're seeing between Netanyahu and Obama.
No, and nor with Israel, might I add, because you looking at the president's chart in relation to Israel's national chart, we find that his sun, the sun in Pluto, his sun is very tightly also conjunct the Israeli Pluto, and we're talking a matter of 6 minutes that President Obama's sun is off from the Israeli Pluto. So that's an astonishingly exact symmetry between these two, and linkage between these two charts. And Pluto is going to represent the Israeli urge to transform themselves, to regenerate their people, to regenerate their nation. And it's also going to sort of represent the more destructive elements of Israel's transformation into the modern era. And with President Obama's sun conjunct that planet, conjunct that point, then to me it really says, wow, this president is going to inherit the Mideast conflict in a serious way. And furthermore, being the sun, he's going to attract a lot of fame and a lot of attention and a lot of renown for that. One feature of President Obama's natal figure is that his is a nocturnal birth, and so his Spiridaria tables are nocturnal. He belongs to the nocturnal sect. And also his moon is what we call preventional, losing light in the chart. Therefore, what we have here is someone who is going to reach his culmination point. He's going to achieve what he's known for in history after he reaches middle age. Now, that could be the American presidency, or it could be some larger aim, such as arriving at a significant, lasting peace in Israel. That's certainly with his sun conjunct the Israeli Pluto. That's certainly I would see being one of his objectives. I think that our president would love to go down in history as being the American president who affects a lasting and effective peace in Israel. So what we could have here, in essence, is President Obama pursuing a very specific strategy in Israel based on his own personal idea of how the region should be sculpted. Do you see?
So, what do you feel for Obama in the middle of August? So, I just progressed Obama's chart and added the transits for this time in the middle of August, when we feel the previous solar eclipse, the November solar eclipse, gets triggered or activated strongly, and wanted to see what potentially is going on for Obama. I'll run the major progressed aspects as well, Stephen, to see what the energies are like for Obama in the middle of August next year. But I was interested to get your feel for how it affects him. So given that we're talking about the Israeli South Node, and we're talking about the Neptune in Obama's chart, it would seem that either it's some extreme. Either Obama is in an exceptionally difficult situation at that point in time, and people seem to be disillusioned with him and his leadership at that point in time because of the situation in the Middle East, or alternatively, he is somehow able to come to the rescue and do something that actually addresses whatever's going on in the middle of August. It seems to me to be one of the two. Either he has an opportunity to really improve his reputation by helping to sort that situation out, or he's got egg on his face because the situation in the Middle East has absolutely deteriorated beyond belief, not only in Iraq, but with Israel and Palestine. Which do you feel it would be? I feel it's likely to be more unfortunate for Obama, Stephen, because again, we're talking about the Israeli South Node, and Obama's Neptune, his vision, his dream. It seems to me that it's likely to have, as a minimum, it's likely to be a situation that's going to be very, very uncomfortable for Obama and very difficult for him to manage.
I quite agree, and I'm not, just agreeing here solely because of the evidence of the South Node, which is compelling in and of itself. First of all, the president's sun is progressed into 3 degrees of Libra, if I'm not mistaken. Is that accord with your calculations, Steve?
Let me see.
Yes,
3 degrees Libra.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this is 2 degrees shy of the Israeli 12th house cusp. That's a strike against there being any favorable leadership in coming from America as regards Israel. Now, with the sun having progressed into Libra, wouldn't you say that this brings the idea of diplomacy and one-to-one relationship into play for the president in terms of brokering his will, brokering, some sort of lasting peace? This brings into the concept of relationship. The Libra is quintessentially about relationship. So, as far as I'm thinking, we said some words earlier about, we speculated about the president's alleged ambition toward achieving something significant in this regard. The sun having progressed into Libra would perhaps be crystallizing these ambitions. However, with Neptune, the president's Neptune having progressed into 9 Scorpio, this is in a square with the Israeli moon. You see, and this is going to signify increasing dissatisfaction with President Obama's engagement in the Iraqi conflict, and this could lead to bolder actions on the account of Israel.
It could do, and I do get the feeling, I get the vibe from the Israelis that they're just prepared to handle this situation because it seems like it's just down to them. We talked before about the fact that potentially the Israelis are feeling quite alone or unsupported.
Well, sure.
There's a lot of criticism about humanitarian issues in Palestine. There was a lot of criticism even before these 4 children were killed on the beach today. There was criticism yesterday about the Israeli intelligence services or military dropping leaflets and sending text messages and voicemail messages to people in Gaza saying, get out of your homes at 8 a.m. because it's not safe to be there. And it begs the question, well, where do you go if you're in Gaza? And you get a text message or a phone call or a leaflet, your kid brings you a leaflet saying, get out at 8 a.m. Well, where'd you go?
Well, I dare say
where'd you go in Gaza?
I dare say that's an actual upgrade over historic treatment, Steve, because there's, some of the stories about prior forced relocations are downright heart-wrenching. And the sad thing is, if one goes around relating these stories, then one actually invites the charge of anti-Semitism, which in prior shows I've talked about the etymological nonsense of that word, in the sense that the word Semitic refers to ethnic, Arabs and people who speak, Semitic languages, which includes, Palestinians. But at any rate, that's a digression. What was I saying before I so rudely interrupted myself?
Well, I think where you were going was you were talking about the military or the intelligence services in Israel actually advising people that they're going to be, they're likely to be harmed in their homes.
Right.
So I think you were about to say, well, that's actually an improvement. But in actual fact, I think it's an ass covering tactic. Stephen, be careful because I'm going to reverse my car very quickly. Down your street when you're walking tomorrow.
Oh, there's no doubt. There's an iron hand inside the velvet glove. I mean, it is a cover your rear situation. Israel has demonstrated over and over again its willingness to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is the title to your house. Well, guess what? It's mine now." I mean, seriously, we told you about this. So sorry your child got killed, but we did give you a leaflet. Right. I mean, we have situations. Imagine you go out, you go to the grocery store, and you come home from the grocery store, and an Israeli family is moving into your house, and the Israeli army is surrounding that house to protect them from you. Is that people might be saying, "Oh man, ridiculous. That's stupid." It's happened over and over again. So the Palestinians have a laundry list of complaints that deserve an international equitable forum, and they deserve compassionate redress. However, we also have a logistical situation here where Israel is also there. I can't. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't want to. I mean, I don't want to get involved and speculate really too far as to what should happen, as far as what probably will or what the astrological symbolism says will happen. I think all the inhabitants of that region, both the Palestinians and the Israelis, are going to get tired of the progressed Mars conjunct Mercury that's also conjunct the Israeli ascendant. That's operational here. Progressed Mars, progressed Mercury are conjunct in the president's chart, and what this is going to yield is a fondness for debate. They're tired of the debating here. They don't want any more summits. They don't want any more accords. They want resolution.
Yeah, shallow conferences with bottles of Perrier.
Right.
Yeah, but
Palestine wants recognition on this issue.
Yeah, and there's an increasing amount of support for Palestine. There were big demonstrations in France, in Paris, and other locations, and in the UK. in favor of the Palestinian people. I looked at the other eclipses that we've had recently, Stephen, and for Obama, the lunar eclipse that occurred in the middle of April, that was conjunct his progressed Mars and pretty close to his progressed Mercury. And I was going to look at the solar eclipse because we had a solar eclipse again at the end of April. I wanted to see where that appeared in Obama's chart. That's very close to his moon, his progressed moon. So I would say next month's going to be a very tough month for Obama. What do you feel?
Next month, meaning August 1st to August 31st?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really do. I mean, because for one thing, with Mars in Libra, what this represents historically for America are reluctant generals, generals without the will to fight. So, really the president has no tactical puissance in the situation. It's not a question of whether he wants to commit tactical resources, military resources to this, in terms of economic aid for Israel to arm itself. It's not that the president doesn't want to do that, which I don't think he does, but he can't. He can't. The war, again, the generals would be reluctant to become involved in this situation tangibly. They're probably very prickly about this. Again, Mars and Libra would represent reluctant generals, and Mars and Libra, to my thinking, might also represent the president's lack of a desire to get entangled in this with military assistance of any kind to Israel. And we see for that time period, his progressed Uranus at 28 degrees Leo. Now it's in the bounds of Saturn. It's in that area of Leo ruled by Saturn, which is going to give the president's progressed Uranus a Saturnine flare. That's going to represent, in other words, the president's Uranus, his progressed Uranus, is going to be a symbol for a tension between the things that restrict him and his desire to go about getting power the way he wants it. Obviously the president has his own personal goal with this, and obviously if he had his way about it, he'd go about getting that goal a certain way. But there are certain restrictions there, and this is symbolized by Uranus's placement in the bounds of Saturn. And it's really just a symbol for tension in general. So this isn't going to be a good. If I were the president's physicians, I would certainly monitor his health for stress-related indications, stress-related dangers. Because I'll tell you something also, the Uranus, his progressed Uranus, is exactly conjunct, again, within a handful of minutes, the Israeli Mars, you see. Now, this is very interesting. What on earth could we possibly expect from such a configuration, Steve? What are your thoughts about this?
About which configuration?
Well, I'm looking at the president's chart, progress chart for August the 16th, 2014. And in that chart, his progressed Uranus is at the 28th degree of Leo. Let me
see. Let me just get the three wheels in front of me, the tri-wheel. Obama,
sure.
And we're saying middle of August.
We are. Right.
Okay, and we're looking at transiting Mercury, did you say?
Well, we looked at that earlier, and as sort of a general representation of the president's fondness for just debating this issue instead of doing anything about it. But what we're looking at now specifically is his progressed Uranus in relation to the Israeli Mars. I want to see if your computation...
Oh, sorry, I didn't have the Israeli chart. So the Israeli natal Mars or the Israeli progressed Mars?
No, the Israeli natal Mars.
Okay, let me see. Barack Obama. Transits. Let me see.
Okay.
So Obama's progressed Uranus.
Right.
I've got that conjunct natal Venus in Israel's chart.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
you might be looking at. Is it
Oh,
possible?
actually, no. I'm sorry. No, it's my mistake. No. So do you know what it's like when you've got 5 wheels?
Yeah, I was
The
just about to say.
Quinkly wheel that makes your mind boggle.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Obama's progressed Uranus is at 28 degrees Leo, right? Conjunct his North Node at 27.
Right. Now we're
Okay.
on the right track. Exactly.
Oh yes. Conjunct. I can see conjunct Israel's Mars, natal Mars at 28 degrees. Yeah, that is interesting. I honestly, I know it sounds obvious, but I would say it's this is a dynamic that suddenly gets triggered by transit,
Right.
suddenly because Uranus is involved. All of a sudden, Obama is heavily involved in the issues associated with Israel's military action, because that military action is described by Mars, and because we've got Uranus at Obama's North Node, it's going to be sudden, probably unexpected for most people. And in the middle of August, Mercury does transit just over that point, just as the Sun will be hovering around the later degrees of Leo, where you've got Obama's North Node and Uranus. So that to me says, yeah, that he's going to be dragged into a sudden situation that is very much about Israel's military action. Would you disagree?
I would not disagree, actually. First of all, let me just say I completely know what it's like to have, I call it chart burnout, where even though, we're on computers here, the appropriate mental image perhaps would be, Harry Potter in his study, his entire desktop wallpapered with astrological charts. Would you say that's a fairly apt image for what it is to work with all of these different horoscopes we're working with, Steve?
Yeah, and I've even got the little white owl. I went to an alchemy conference that was just incredible.
Oh, lovely.
And I bought this amazing pottery wizard holding a crystal ball. He's really tall, and he's got this black cloak and amazing wizard's hat, and he's got this crystal ball in his hand. And they right next to it was this little, pretend owl. So I got the two of them. But yeah, I've got them here, and a lot of charts, as you said.
Yeah, they blossom like fruit on a tree. But we're talking now about that progressed Uranus in Leo conjunct the Israeli natal Pluto, and definitely sudden. Uranus is famed for its suddenness and its eccentricity. That's the interesting thing, especially being configured as it is with the nodes, because this bespeaks an unusual connection, a connection with unusual people for the president. You see, that's why it's very interesting to me, and especially when you consider the Uranus-Mars connotation of, surgery. It raises the tantalizing possibility of, of a surgical procedure of some sort. Not God forbid, surgery to the president, but a surgical military operation. This, despite all our, my guff earlier about the likelihood of there not being any military engagement, however, from the United States. However, astrology isn't, it's not magnetic resonance imaging, for one thing, and for another thing, Uranus is inherently unstable and unpredictable, isn't he, Steve? I mean, Uranus is he represents the opposite of things. Being connected with the nodes like that, it's going to represent an eccentric sort of relationship that's broken or formed very suddenly. And the Mars, the Mars Uranus conjunction itself is going to represent rebellion. So, if anything, it could represent the president rebelling against breaking from traditional American behavior, or it could represent Israel acting in defiance of America's wishes. This is a.
It could well be that. It could well be. I feel it's more likely to be the latter.
Right.
I feel it's more likely to be Israel taking whatever action they feel they want to take, regardless of international opinion. The rhetoric seems to be very much about we need to do what we need to do to keep ourselves safe. We need to put a stop to the rocket situation, and that's what we're going to do. And they have. I wonder whether the August situation could involve the ground invasion, because the Israelis have got troops at the border. Obviously, they've got tanks and all kinds of equipment there at the border to Gaza. And they have said a number of times that if they may actually go in by land. It's one thing going in and bombing properties of homes of people that are apparently involved with Hamas, and bombing locations that rockets are launched from. But going in by land is a very different ball game. It's far more dangerous for the Israeli forces, and it is also far more difficult to get out. If you want to get out of bombing somebody aerially, then you fly home. But if you've gone in by land, it can be very difficult to pull out. And I'm wondering whether what we're sensing in August could be that they do go in by land.
Well, I am inclined to think that this will be the case, because that sort of, for one thing, there's historical precedent for it, and for another, I think one of the big problems here is that the source of aggression is coming from neighborhoods. Israel perceives its threat as residing in the suburbs, residing in the the apartment complexes, etc. And they are not going to treat this action in a civil way. In other words, they're not going to use police forces for this. This is going to be, a military cleanup, a military action. So pretty soon, this has a very distinct danger of devolving to a point where, it could be a door-to-door sort of operation. Do you see? I'd like to actually progress Israel's actual chart itself. I mean, I did some solar returns for Israel, and this year the ascendant, what they have rising is Libra. I cast a solar return chart for 2014, and Libra is accentuated. And this brings up the idea, again, of door-to-door sort of issues, neighborhood sort of issues. We have Mars and Libra retrograde in the 12th house in this solar return figure. That's going to, bode, as far as I'm concerned, it shows a mistake made, a 12th house issue happening. A confinement also, because the 12th house it represents confinement. In the solar return chart, that 12th house is ruled by Mercury. I'll see, where is Mercury at here in this chart? It's in Gemini, in the 8th house. Not very good. That also bodes poorly. To have the ruler of the 12th house so uncomfortably associated with the 8th house, can represent the idea of Israel making a blunder this year. Venus is the ruler of the year in terms of this solar return. She rules the chart. She's in the sign of her fall, actually a sign of her detriment, which is Aries, conjunct Uranus. as well. This is the Israeli solar return chart, just to clarify. And in that chart, in the 6th house, we have Venus, Uranus, and the part of fortune all conjunct each other. That's not the most stable of configurations. Solar return moon is in 20 Scorpio, conjunct retrograde Saturn. This shows the people who are going to be inclined towards revenge. You know, Scorpio is very, very revenge seeking. Let's see if we can, you know, when the moon is progressed to conjunct.
There's no doubt that the Palestinians are furious about what's going on.
Yeah, both sides.
And in honesty, okay, they're sending rockets across the border into Israel, but that's nothing. I'm sorry. I don't mean it's nothing. I don't mean it's not significant or it's okay to do that. It's absolutely not. And let's face it, if I were firing rockets into your yard, Stephen, you'd have a problem with it, and you'd take action to deal with it. So I understand that. But what I meant to say was the actual impact, the humanitarian impact of Hamas launching rockets into Israel is nothing, next to nothing, in comparison to the overall humanitarian impact in Palestine, and the Arab world, not necessarily Hamas or the Palestinians. The Arab world is not going to sit by and just let that happen without consequences. And again, I have concerns about what happens in Israel and what the Israelis do in response to whatever occurs in Israel.
Well,
because they're very heavy-handed.
Yes, they are. And also, they don't really care. It doesn't really bother them if the UN... I mean, the UN has spoken out in condemnation of Israel before. Israel has a bad record in the United Nations. In fact, Israel has relied upon the United States veto on more than one occasion to avoid UN sanctions. So, you know, Israel, unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, and, you know, this is just my opinion. This is no kind of prediction or, you know, it's just my opinion. And my opinion of it is that Israel's, the relationship between the Israeli chart and the United States NATO figure is one that will probably benefit the Israelis more than it would benefit America, diplomatically speaking.
Well, I think though, Stephen, in fairness to the Israelis, and in fairness to anybody that wants to needs the United Nations to take action, it seems to be nigh on impossible because they're always deadlocked. The Security Council is always deadlocked because of the veto situation. So I think, in honesty, that the United Nations is an incredible concept. You know, if you and I are fans of C.C. Zane, and Zane, in his day, when he was writing about the future, he wrote about the concept of an organization like the United Nations and how that could really bring nations together and address major issues in the world. So conceptually, it's great, but when it's constantly deadlocked, it becomes impotent. And nations literally just take the attitude, well, we need to do what we need to do because we're not going to get any action from the United Nations.
This is very much true. That I might add is also more or less the current state of affairs, believe it or not, in the European Union, which, in my opinion, is actually seeing a reduction in a centralized political authority from its earlier incarnation as the European Economic Community. You know, the EEC, the precursor to the European Union, in my opinion, had more political authority than the European Union. To my thinking, the European Union seems more focused towards the betterment of its currency, and even then, it doesn't really have, I don't think, a centralized fiscal policy. So I mean, the United Nations is fairly similar, and it's also quite ineffective a lot of times in enforcing its will. And Israel would just tread slipshod over whatever the United Nations says. Israel is prepared to do whatever is necessary to keep their security. They're not willing to reduce the size of their territory significantly. They do seem willing to curb settlements to a degree at least, because let's face it, the Israeli people or the Israeli population can be somewhat fanatical, deluded, and downright irritating and offensive with their settlement behavior. So let's just go ahead and face that. And so the state of Israel has, in fact, at least made token perfunctory gestures to curb wanton settlements. Of course, they haven't done anywhere close to a good enough job, but if they put their heart into it, then that could possibly be a negotiating chip, a point for peace. But I don't think I'm not sure if the Israeli people, aside from the liberal minority who care about the Palestinians, I'm not sure if they want peace. They're scared. And, Scorpio, which is where the moon is in this Israeli solar return chart for 2014, Scorpio is a very fearful sign. It hoards secret. So this is another sort of behavior we could expect from Israel if it doesn't get what it wants from America. It'll set out in whatever way it can to get what it wants from someone else. Now, should we just say no to Israel's every desire? No, no, we shouldn't. We should strive to cooperate with Israel as well. We should. This is the difficult part of the situation. I suspect that it's possible that certain elements in the White House might see the Mideast peace crisis in terms of notches on their belt, when in fact they should be seeing it in perhaps more practical and mechanical terms, such as bringing in Turkey to help negotiate sincere and workable peace, and working at peace from a direction that will actually affect it lastingly. One can argue whether or not Washington has indeed been focused on doing that, and if we put our minds to it, perhaps we can. Because we have to, by a workable solution, I mean one in which the Palestinians and the Israelis are both happy. Is such a solution possible? I think we can get close enough to stabilize the region and to further our aims. And the way to do that is to keep Israel on our side, because if we don't, they'll turn to Russia for their funding, for their protection, and they'll get it. They'll get it as well. Russia would love just to, even though they can't afford to do it, they would love to, in order to increase their stature and their preeminence in the region. They would love to do that. So we have to be careful of that happening, and we also have to be careful of Turkey radicalizing and becoming, leaning more towards becoming a more Islamist state, as the Turkish people justifiably thumb their noses at Europe and say, you know what? Screw you. We've been trying to gain recognition as human beings from you people for ages. It's time to, take a dump or get off the pot, for Christ's sake. Or else, we're going to remember the fact that, we were an empire ourselves. Now, let me tell you something. Turkey exercises a concept called strategic depth in the region, meaning America, Britain, going, strutting through the region, Israeli Jews strutting through the region, they bear the taint of the Roman centurion, whereas the Ottoman Turk, has a strategic depth. Arabs have been accustomed to Turkish rule for several centuries by now. That's what I mean by strategic depth. We lack that. About the most depth we were able to achieve was in the Crusades. And that was superficial, to be kind about it. You know what I'm saying, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the situation is just so complex. It's so complex. There's so much history. And I was looking at the BBC website because they have some great video clips on the history of certain conflicts or the history between certain populations, and they're really interesting. But our starting point with the Middle East, when we had our first show about Iraq, I think it was, our starting point then was the fact that we arbitrarily drew lines on a map, and the people themselves didn't get to decide where they wanted their borders to be. And then obviously the situation with Israel and Palestine is even more challenging, because the Palestinian territory has just been constantly squeezed by the expansion of Israel and the illegal settlements. And I think that you make a great observation about Turkey, that perhaps Turkey could play a role helping to resolve matters, but it's just so complex. It's difficult to get your head around it all.
Turkey is definitely going in the right direction. It wants to democratize. Of all the Arab states, well, Turkey's not an Arabic state, first of all. I apologize for that. The Turkish ethnicity is quite distinct from the Arab ethnicity. They're more closely related ethnically to Kurds. However,
that's the Iranian ethnicity.
Very close as well.
Persian.
Now, this is why Turkey is important to court, because a lot of the Central Asian states have a significant Turkic-speaking minority. Do you see? And, so Turkey can buff and polish the appeal of the American way of life to a substantial degree with these people, and we want that. Because, perhaps we Americans here in the mainland of the American global enterprise can afford to be idealistic. But, when we go out to our cars and turn the ignition switches to go to our meetings, they require oil. So there's a certain amount of practicality that the American people are going to have to undertake. Now, as we spoke a little bit about the dispersal of American global power, this is an inevitable process. About the best we can hope for is to shunt it in directions amenable to us. What we haven't really spoken about so much, but could be the topic of future shows, is going to be the pending wave of American domestic reforms. Because in order for America to slow her wane, to slow her descent, and again to guide the dispersal of power to where she wants it to be in the way that she wants it to go, a slew of domestic reforms are going to be necessary here, unfortunately. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. I wish at times, Stephen, that we had a computer program that could analyze all of the different astrological dynamics for these nations. Our project, the book that we're working on, looking out at the next 20 years or so, perhaps 25 years, and basically analyzing world dynamics from an astrological perspective and saying, well, what occurs in the different charts at different points in time. It's an enormous piece of work, but I was thinking that if ultimately we could champion or invent a tool that can do all of that, all of the number crunching, and actually flag issues, that would be absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, that would be something to develop, and it would be vital to have in our research, because obviously we're going to focus on certain key areas as they become important. We spoke about the importance of the entire landmass stretching from Portugal to Japan. America is a global power because it dominates pretty much that entire landmass. In the Far East, we have we've got that sewn up with Japan and South Korea. This is making China nervous. Again, we talked about how China fears encirclement. And so that's one area that we've got China encircled in. So we have the Far East covered. And then there's the southern border of that Eurasian continent, and that's where the Middle East is at. And then we have the Ukraine area. That's the third important front, the third important flashpoint in place of important strategy. in this area. So we'll certainly be watching all of these regions. Plus, I'm quite interested in the development of Latin America, having lived there for some time, having engaged deeply and intimately with the Spanish-speaking people, and also the Indian-speaking, or the Indian people of the region who speak their own indigenous language. It's a culture that I have a lot of respect and curiosity about, and they're going to become they're going to have an increased hemispherical influence for sure, especially with the great economic output of Brazil. And there are some other stable economies down there as well. Uruguay and Paraguay have some fairly decent economies, especially Uruguay. Montevideo is a capital along the lines of any of the European capitals in terms of aesthetic appeal. Chile also and Argentina also are relatively developed countries compared to Ecuador, Peru, Colombia. I love Latin America, so we definitely have to do some shows about Latin America one of these days, Steve. Definitely.
We should. Maybe we need a field trip as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Brazil it merits a lot of interest with their induction into BRIC, which sounds more like a secondary school, after school punishment pod than it does anything of real global import. BRIC. It sounds like the villainous acronym bad guys in some video game from 1993. You know what I mean? BRIC. Watch out, or else you're going to get a brick dropped on you, which is probably undoubtedly the effect they're going for. What really shocked me, though, Steve, was India's inclusion into this. They've been around for a while, BRIC has. They had their first summit back in 2009, so it's not like this is a surprise. They're making the news these days because they've recently had like their fifth or sixth summit in Brazil. They've made some new additions. With Brazil and South Africa, which is also surprising. But, again, because of India's historical enmity with China, I'm surprised to see these guys yoked together. Steve, did you join BRIC as well? Or did Skype prematurely terminate our conversation?
No. I was chatting away on mute. What I was saying was the only thing that could have made that photograph of the BRICS leaders huddled together, the only way that could have been better would have been to have Angela Merkel with her new cell phone waving her new spy-proof cell phone in the photograph.
Yeah, I got to tell you, man. That's another reason why the shady behavior. This is one area that I hope is a huge domestic reform for America, is the intolerable lack of transparency. One thing that we haven't really hammered on is the idea that it's a contradiction in terms to be a global power and also a democracy. These are two mutually exclusive modes of existence, you see. And this is a huge source of tension and friction and heat in the American domestic scene. It's a big question that we haven't even begun to answer in a systematic and a sane way. How can we reconcile the disparity between being a global power and being a democracy? How can we do that? And I'll tell you what we don't do is to erect these citadels of privacy-destroying counterintelligence and intelligence infrastructure like the NSA and Homeland Security. I really hope the American populace will say, you know what, we'll take our chances with the terrorists, but I don't want the NSA listening to my conversations. I want to send a message to Washington that, hey, you guys have to listen to us. And also another area of domestic reform I'd like to see, Steve, is the unfair preference, the ability for disinterested parties to influence the American electoral process. That has to happen.
In what sense? Be more specific. I'm not sure what you mean.
Campaign contributions and also the lobbies these days. I'm not saying that if you're invested in America's future, I think there has to be sanity in terms of lobbying laws and campaign financing laws as well. I think that the good old-fashioned American, what's the word I'm looking? Egalitarianism ought to be applied to financial party contributions. We have a system where politicians depend upon sponsors. This has to stop because it's corrupted our mode of governance and rendered it impotent and wasteful. We waste. There's no excuse. We have to do economic reform where America also stops wasting its money.
When I moved to the US, I was staggered to learn how much is spent on campaigning.
Oh yeah,
absolutely staggered at the cost. And I was sort of like the bailout. I was thinking, well, why don't rather than bailing out all these banks and organizations, why don't we just give every citizen an amount of money and boost the economy that way, and let them choose where to invest there or where to spend their money. But the numbers in the US are just incredible. It's really mind-boggling to move to the US from another nation and hear the numbers that are quoted. The national debt, the economy, just the numbers are big in America. Everything's big, isn't it?
Yeah, well, as above, so below. The campaign finances that you're talking about, they're a very accurate metric to the pool of corrupt money that politicians can get their hands on. That's why, you know what I'm saying? The one is related to the other. Doesn't that make sense? The one, in other words, the huge amount of campaign money available is a representation of the stakes that involved for the people. You could come up with the argument. I would be so bold as to label it a cockamamie argument that that these politicians are in it for idealistic reasons to benefit their constituents, and in many cases, this is probably the case, but not in enough cases. Not in enough cases. So this is what's going to have to happen is a global awakening of a sense, ironically enough, for Americans right here at home, where we motivate ourselves to take on a do-it-yourself approach to governance, and we make our voices heard collectively, and we start defining where we want to stand, what our strategy is globally. And that's what we here at Metaphysical Media are doing, or we hope to do. That's one of the things we hope to do. But for sure, our spying activities on ourselves, spying on Germany is bad. Germany can climb into bed with Russia, too. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. Germany has tons of economic appeal. Germany, in fact, is one of the engines of the European Union. Germany's holding the damn thing together.
Do you know that there was a real... I thought it was a joke initially, but apparently it's not a joke, that the members of the parliament in Germany are even having discussions about no longer using email.
Yeah, they're going to go to typewriters.
Yes, did you read that? That they're talking about using typewriters again so that they can't be monitored.
That would serve two purposes. It would, A, be a punishment, a snub to Washington, which would cast a slur on our global preeminence, bear in mind. That's a minor one, but it would be one nonetheless. And two, it would accomplish their goal of increasing secrecy, but I mean, come on. You know how expensive that would be? They could certainly afford to do it. They would incur a cost in additional paper. They'd probably pass that cost along to us. But see, this is precisely what I mean. America doesn't need to be suffering these things with its European allies. We need to be engaging with them more fully and more cooperatively. You see, so this is a definite downturn. So let's hope. I
think that one of the worst stories that came out there was the MI5 actually monitoring the attendees at the G8 summit. I know it's the G7 now, but it was G8, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they actually set up this sort of internet cafe or internet booth area for the leaders to go and log on and do their business. And it was all this big, it was all rigged. It was a big setup. That was just incredible. But there just seems to be no end of revelations about spying and legislation as well. There was some more legislation passed in the UK this week about access or providing, guaranteeing access to certain information for.
Hello, Steve. Skype, you did it to us again. Hey, Steve, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you not hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. You dropped out before. Oh, there he went again. Well,
I'm having Skype issues again.
You know what? You're having NSA issues. There was the CIA. They knew that I was about to announce that we were going to do a show based on them one of these days. What do you think about that, Steve? If we can somehow manage to arrive at a chart for the Department of Homeland Security, the CIA et al., what do you think about doing a show on the American secrecy apparatus?
I would love to do that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We're actually coming down to the final 10 minutes here. Maybe Skype's trying to cut us off for a reason. But I just want to say you can find me at thegingerpsychic.com. You can find Steve at StephenFrampton.com. That's Stephen with a V. By all means, come check us out. Schedule some time with us and let us know what's going on in your life. We can definitely help you out. Steve, on his website, has his book, Thinking Completely Outside the Box, which, in addition to providing a very cogent and unique analysis of the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting, has a very useful and nifty astrological primer section in that book. So by all means, go over there and check it out. You got anything you want to add, Steve?
No, great show, Stephen. Good to work with you as always, and I look forward to our next show.
Very good. Well, we will see you guys here next Friday night. Ciao.